Hello, everybody. If you are watching this after the fact, go ahead and fast forward about 9-ish minutes. We're starting the stream about 10 minutes early, but the Bible study is going to start at 7 p.m. Otherwise, it's exactly like normal.
Live now.
Yep.
Started streaming 105 seconds ago.
105 seconds. Yeah. Let me get a drink. I'll be right back.
Oops, I left the fish tank lid open.
Huh?
I left the fish tank lid open.
Oh, okay. I can close that. You're humming Phantom of the Opera.
Apparently was, yes.
Yep. I can tell. You're hungry?
Just a little.
I'm not.
You might be after you work out.
Maybe. We'll find out. Hello.
And salutations.
Mm-hmm. What?
It's just whatever.
Just giving me the crazy eye.
Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Draft notice.
Yep.
Greetings.
Yeah. I'm gonna need a haircut pretty soon. It's gonna be getting to look like the early '90s pretty soon.
It's not that bad.
I just mean in general.
Remember when you had the long hair?
Yeah,
You still got a ways to get there.
I still got a ways to get there. But still, I don't really want to have a mullet. I don't have the face for a mullet. There's something about Blue Letter Bible that does not like your computer.
Yeah.
Yep. Or at least it doesn't like the Chrome browser.
Yeah.
Yeah, Safari loads just fine.
If you open Safari, you need to go to my history and open all the last tabs that were closed.
I already did that. Mm-hmm.
I tried closing them because I figured it might save the clunkiness.
Yeah, I just wanted to have access to the interlinear in case something came up that would be helped by an interlinear. And we'll find out right about now because it's past 7.
Yep.
So we're going to go ahead and start. All right. We are doing Exodus 5 and 6 today, and it's probably going to be a fairly short study because this is like this bit of narrative is fairly fast. There's not all that much to really dissect and dive into here.
That's not what you said earlier.
Sorry. So, I mean, unless we get off on a rabbit trail, which is very possible. Anyway, Exodus 5, verse 1. Later, Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, later after what? Well, this is after Moses leaves Midian, right? Mm-hmm. When last we saw Moses, he was in Midian. He had gone to the mountain of God, which is west of Midian or west in Midian. It's not specifically stated, or on the other side of Midian, something like that. There's some translation options there, right? Mm-hmm. He had gone to the mountain of God. He had heard from God and been given this mission to lead the people Israel. And he hemmed and hawed and made excuses and wanted to quit. And God said, well, fine, I'll send your brother with you, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of being the exclusive leader, he was now going to be sharing that role with Aaron. And then there was that episode with the whole bridegroom of blood thing, which was, it's always fun. Mm-hmm. It's always fun to try to work your way through that one. And then they made it back to Egypt and talked to the people, and Aaron showed them the signs that God had told him to show them. Okay. So, chapter 5, verse 1. I already started chapter 5, verse 1. We'll start it again. Later, Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh responded, who is Yahweh that I should obey him by letting Israel go? I do not know anything about Yahweh, or your Bible might say, I do not recognize Yahweh. And besides, I will not let Israel go. Okay, so actually there is something to talk about there, right? Like you can just read straight through that, but you do need to take a minute to stop and think about the conflict that's being set up, right? And I don't know if we got into this at all last week, but the conflict has a whole lot of religious baggage involved in it because of who Pharaoh is and what his job is in Egyptian religion. So we look at Pharaoh and we tend to think political ruler / king / some kind of religious figurehead, right? And it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? Mm-hmm. So Pharaoh was considered to be the literal incarnation of Horus, the son of God, the son of their god Ra in the flesh. And Ra is their sun god, like sun in the sky, right? Mm-hmm. So Pharaoh's job in Egyptian religion is to maintain cosmic order. Now, we did talk about this a little bit one or two studies ago, but if the Nile didn't flood properly, that was Pharaoh's problem, right? If disease came and killed everybody, that was Pharaoh's problem. If the sun didn't rise in the morning, that was Pharaoh's problem, right? So the normal cycle of natural processes that were supposed to keep the country alive and keep the people alive, the people ascribed Pharaoh the role and the power for keeping that all going. As a concept, it was called Ma'at, right? So Pharaoh's job is to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order of Egypt that keeps people living, right? And the sort of the point of this first part of chapter 5 is setting up the conflict between Pharaoh and God, right? Mm-hmm. This is the whole, two of them enter and only one of them can leave thing, right? Pharaoh and God will be pitted against each other, and we'll find out which one of them is really in charge, which one of them can really maintain cosmic order, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important to see that the conflict is not between Moses and Pharaoh, right? Because one of Moses' complaints was, well, who am I that I should go to talk to Pharaoh? Pharaoh's initial reaction is not, Moses, who the heck are you to come and ask me this? It's, who is Yahweh? I don't care about that guy, right? So Pharaoh's position is, I don't serve your God. I don't have to do anything he says. I'm bigger and better than him. I do what I want. I don't recognize his authority. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So he's really thumbing his nose at God at this point. Okay. Then they answered, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God, or else he may strike us with a plague or sword. Which is a little bit of ironic foreshadowing there, right? Also, some people on the internet will make a big deal about this because 3 days, they're going to go way more than 3 days, right? Going from Goshen, the region of Egypt where they lived, where the Hebrews had settled, in the Delta region, going from there to where they're going to receive the law at Sinai is way more than 3 days, right? So people on the internet will have, absolute mind-blowing arguments about this because, oh, God lied. Well, the whole point of this thing is that God is going to prove that Pharaoh has no power, right? Mm-hmm. Is God obligated to give Pharaoh all the details of what's going to happen? Doesn't appear to be. He's going to use Pharaoh as a stepping stone to make a point. Apparently, Pharaoh doesn't get to have all the information. There's no part of the text that says that he has to have all the information. Mm-hmm. Another thing to talk about here would be when God gave Moses this task, right? He said that he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart and he wouldn't let the people go, right? Well, does God harden Pharaoh's heart in this passage that we just read? Doesn't say that at all. There will be other passages later where God explicitly hardens Pharaoh's heart, mm-hmm. where the text specifically says God hardened Pharaoh's heart and he wouldn't let the people go, right? But in this first case, right, there's nothing at all that indicates that God did anything to change Pharaoh's mind or push him one way or the other. This is just Pharaoh's default. This is who he is on any given day, right? Mm-hmm. So this is not a case of Pharaoh was a happy-go-lucky guy and would have let the people go and do whatever they felt the need to do, and all they had to do was ask. No. This guy from the get-go is completely against the idea of doing anything that the Hebrews want and respecting their God in any way. Make sense? So, again, God is going to use Pharaoh to make a theological point. He's going to punish Pharaoh for Pharaoh's attitude, right? If, it doesn't make sense to think about Pharaoh as not having any responsibility here, because he's given plenty of chances to make a good decision, and he just doesn't, right? So his very first line that he gets in this entire story is him expressing that he doesn't care what God wants. Okay. The king of Egypt said to them, this is verse 4, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? Get to your work, Pharaoh also said to them, look, the people of the land are so numerous, and you would stop them from working. So not only does he refuse them, but he tells them, get back to work, you're keeping the people from working. I have things that I need from them, right? So not only does he not regard their God, but he definitely does consider the Hebrews to be servants and slaves. That day, Pharaoh commanded the overseers of the people as well as their foremen, don't continue to supply the people with straw for making bricks as before. They must go and gather straw for themselves, but require the same quota of bricks from them as they were making before. Do not reduce it, for they are slackers. This is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Impose heavier work on them, then they will be occupied with it and not pay attention to deceptive words. So his plan and we'll see how this unfolds. His plan is to just make the people more miserable and make this all look like Moses and Aaron's fault, right?
Mhm.
That's his method that he's going to use for dealing with Moses and Aaron. He wants to make the people hate them so that those two go away and don't bother him anymore. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. 10. So the overseers and the foremen of the people went out and said to them, "This is what Pharaoh says. I'm not giving you straw. Go get straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but there will be no reduction in all of your work." So the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The overseers insisted, "Finish your assigned work each day, just as you did when straw was provided." Then the Israelite foremen, whom Pharaoh's slave drivers had set over the people, were beaten and asked, "Why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks yesterday or today, as you did before?" This is an example of turds rolling downhill,
Mhm.
right? So tell the foreman to do this. The foreman tell the Hebrew overseers, "You're not doing this thing that we told you to do." The Hebrew overseers ignore the people. It's just rolling downhill, right?
Mhm.
What verse did we get to? 15? Okay, yeah. So the Israelite foreman went in and cried for help to Pharaoh. "Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw has been given to your servants, yet they say to us, 'Make bricks.' Look, your servants are being beaten, but it is your own people who are at fault." So their objection is, "What the heck did you do this for?"
Mhm.
Right? But he said, "You are slackers. Slackers, that's what you are saying. Or this is why you are saying, 'Let us go sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. No straw will be given to you, but you must produce the same quantity of bricks." The Israelite foremen saw that they were in trouble when they were told, "You cannot reduce your quantity of bricks." When they left Pharaoh, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who stood waiting to meet them. Oh, gee, this is going exactly like we thought it would go, right?
Mhm.
"May the Lord take note of you and judge," they said to them, "because you have made us reek in front of Pharaoh and his officials, putting a sword in their hand to kill us." Well, that's slightly melodramatic, but basically that's what Pharaoh was going for, right? Make the people hate Moses and Aaron because Moses and Aaron apparently were the ones that came up with this idea, and if they hadn't come along, then everything would be fine.
Mhm.
So the people will then try to get rid of Moses and Aaron. Okay. So Moses went back to the Lord and asked, "Lord, why have you caused trouble for this people? And why did you ever send me? Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has caused trouble for this people, and you haven't delivered your people at all." So Moses is making this God's fault,
Mhm.
right? Um, you remember in Romans, was a week or two ago, I think, when we were reading through chapter 3, is what it was. Yeah, it was chapter 3, Romans 3. That sort of poetic thing where Paul writes, "There's no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands and no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become useless." Right?
Mhm.
Paul in Romans is making this point about how just because the Jews of his day were descendants of Abraham didn't mean that they had been faithful, because the descendants of Abraham had a long history of failing to be faithful, right?
Mhm.
So, what's the first thing that Moses does after meeting resistance? He fails to be faithful, right?
Mhm.
He collapses like a house of cards and goes back to God and said, "You totally aren't doing what you said you were going to do,"
Mhm.
right? Immediately. So the people fall for it. Moses falls for it. Everybody's willing to get up or to give up,
Mhm.
right? This is supposed to be a showdown between Pharaoh and God. Yeah, high noon and all that, right? Pharaoh shifts the playing field to make it between him and Moses and then trounces Moses, right?
Mhm.
So obviously the rest of the book is much longer than this and things don't end here. But it's kind of ironic to see that, even though he's been given this mission by God and he's spoken to God several times now, he's had face-to-face conversations where God tells him exactly what's going to happen and what to do. He has seen and performed miraculous signs by this time,
Mhm.
right? And yet, as soon as he meets resistance, he goes back to God and says, "You're not doing what you said you were going to do." Right? Because some people got angry at him. That's kind of ironic. Anyway, chapter 6, verse 1. But the Lord replied to Moses, "Now you are going to see what I will do to Pharaoh. He will let them go because of my strong hand. He will drive them out of his land because of my strong hand." Now, remember, we talked about how in the beginning, this was a showdown between God and Pharaoh, right? The idea of a strong hand, the idea of Pharaoh's strong hand, is an idiom in Egyptian literature, right? So to use that phrase is kind of to point to a common literary thing that's done with Egyptian kings to talk about their might and greatness, right? So God is using that same literary idea to say, oh, he thinks he's king? I'm going to show him what a king is. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
2. Then God spoke to Moses, telling him, "I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but I did not reveal my name, Yahweh, to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land they live in as foreigners, or they lived in as foreigners. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are forcing to work as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant." And this was how God introduced this plan earlier. And this is what God had told Moses to say to the people, right? And we talked about this a week or so ago when we read that bit about how that introduction, like, hey, this is God. He's that guy. He's the guy that, talked to the patriarchs. He's the guy that made promises to them. Now he's come to fulfill those promises, right? That was supposed to be a challenge to them to respond faithfully, right? Because he talks about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Well, when God promised Abraham something that he hadn't yet delivered on, namely that he would give Abraham a child, an offspring, and make him a nation, what did Abraham do? He believed in God, and it was credited to him as righteous, right? We did a whole thing. There's like an entire chapter of Romans that we went over, in fact, just 2 days ago, that looks at that idea over and over again and, makes it clear that faith is a big deal, right? Well, what's Moses' response to the same situation? He's been given a promise, an explicit promise by God in person that a thing is going to happen. And he goes, "You're not doing it."
Do you think it has anything to do with him not being brought up and taught most likely all the traditions?
I don't know that it does, because it seems to be that the Hebrews in Egypt respond the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh makes their lives hard, and they respond exactly the same way, right? I think this has more to do with communicating the point that even when God's people are not faithful the way they should be, God still is faithful the way he should be. Does that make sense? Because he doesn't go, "Well, you people didn't believe that I would do this thing. Pharaoh made your lives hard and you all wanted to quit. I'm packing up and leaving," right? He repeats the promise the same way and says, "No, I'm doing this thing. This is my covenant. I'm doing this thing," right? So I think that's what we're meant to understand there, that even though the people in Moses are failing in their faith, right, God is still going to do what he promised he's going to do. Okay. 6. Therefore tell the Israelites, "I am Yahweh, and I will deliver you from the forced labor of the Egyptians and free you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and great acts of judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. You will know that I am Yahweh, your God, who delivered you from the forced labor of the Egyptians. I will bring you out of the land I will bring you to the land that I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am Yahweh." Moses told this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their broken spirit and hard labor.
Baby sect.
Huh?
Baby sect.
Yeah. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go from his land." The same thing that he tried before, right? But Moses said in the Lord's presence, "If the Israelites will not listen to me, then how will Pharaoh listen to me, since I am such a poor speaker?" He's still trying that one, right? Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them commands concerning both the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. And then the chapter takes a break from that and gives you a genealogy instead. Right? So this genealogy definitely looks like an interruption here, right? Because we've been following this narrative of, Moses trying to figure out how to do what he needs to do and obey God. And, Pharaoh is giving them a hard time and the people aren't listening. And then God says, "I'm going to tell you what to do." And then instead of writing that bit, we get this genealogy. And then the narrative picks right up after that. And we get what comes next, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, why, oh, why did the writer, whether you believe that's Moses or whether you buy into one of the, documentary hypothesis theories, why did whoever wrote this feel the need to give you a genealogy right there? It's a mystery to me. One explanation that I've heard, okay, well, let's just read the genealogy. These are the heads of their fathers' families. Who's their fathers? What are they talking about? Well, now we're going to see lines that go off from Jacob's first three sons, right? The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok and Palu, Hezron and Carmi. These are the clans of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, next kid. Jemuel, Jamin, I'm probably butchering those names, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the clans of Simeon. These are the names of the sons of Levi. Hey, why Levi? Because Moses and Aaron were Levites. According to their genealogy, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Levi lived 137 years. We don't actually get times for the other guys that we just mentioned, right? It's like they're stepping stones on the way to get to Levi. The sons of Gershon, Libni and Shimei by their clans, the sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. Kohath lived 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mahli and Mushi. These are the clans of the Levites according to their genealogy. Okay, so it's the precursors, right? Now we get to the guy who's credited as being Moses' father. Amram married his father's sister Jochebed, and she bore Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. Remember this, because this is going to pop up later, right? So Jacob, Levi, I think Kohath is next. Yeah. Kohath, Amram, Moses. Jacob, Levi, Kohath, Amram, Moses. Jacob, 1, 2, 3, 4, Moses. 4 generations, right? Why are we making a big deal about this? Because later on, when we're given the genealogy of Joshua, who's not that much younger than Moses, there's 11 generations between Jacob and Joshua, not 4, right? So it's almost like this genealogy has been framed in such a way as to make a particular theological point or a particular literary point or something like that, rather than being an exhaustive list, right? What is that point? It's pretty mysterious. We'll talk about that in a bit. The sons of Izhar, Korah and Nepheg, and Zikri, the sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri, Aaron married Elisheba, daughter of Aminadab and sister of Nashon. She bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Korah, Asir, Elkanah, Abiasaph, probably butchering that too. These are the clans of the Korahites. Aaron's son Eleazar married one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These are the heads of the Levite families by their clan. It was this Aaron and Moses whom the Lord told, bring the Israelites out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. Moses and Aaron were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, in order to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay. I think this genealogy has something to do with Aaron and Moses requiring some kind of legitimacy since they have tried to tell God no, or since Moses specifically has tried to tell God no. Does that make sense? Kind of. We're given this genealogy after the second time that Moses says, I can't do this because I can't speak well. The first time Moses said, I can't do this because I can't speak well, that's when God got angry at him and said, well, fine, your brother Aaron will speak for you, right? Then he whips out that excuse again and says, I can't do this, I can't speak well. And God says, well, I'll tell you what to speak. And then we get this genealogy, which looks like it's compressed to make Jacob, who was named Israel, right? And Levi, his son, like the head of the tribe of Levi, right? To make Moses seem closer to them. And to make Aaron, his brother, seem closer to them. So it seems like maybe the purpose of this genealogy is to lend some legitimacy to Moses and Aaron, right? To move them a little bit closer to the patriarchs in the thinking of the Israelites, right? Also of note, and this is a little bit of an Easter egg for later, we're given the genealogy of Korah at the same time. The Korahites are going to become a thorn in Moses and Aaron's side later on in this story, right? They're going to be the guys that say, well, who do you think you are, being the only ones who get to talk to God? We could do that too, can't we? And then that's going to go badly for them, right? But that's one possibility for why this genealogy is here, right? Because in the culture that this was written to, genealogy matters, right? And your connection to the patriarchs matters. So maybe that's what it's here for.
Yeah.
As far as specifics, we just aren't told, right? There's ways that you can try to interpret this genealogy, and you can analyze it and think on it and ponder it and try to think, what is Moses or whoever you believe wrote this thing, because there's lots of arguments about that too. You can think to yourself, well, why did Moses put this here? What did he need me to understand? Why did he want me to think about this? Right? But it's just not explicit. And, it's best to avoid getting dogmatic about stuff like that. But there it is.
Are we going to do all of 7? Then the 6 is kind of part of 7.
Yeah, the end of 6 is kind of part of 7. We'll do 7. That'll be fine. We have time. On the day the Lord, I'm finishing chapter 6 now, verse 28. On the day the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, he said to him, I am Yahweh. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I am telling you. But Moses replied in the Lord's presence, since I am such a poor speaker, how will Pharaoh listen to me? And I think that's another clue to what we were just talking about, right? Like, the genealogy is bookended with Moses' complaints about being a poor speaker. And the first time he made that complaint, that's when Aaron was looped into this whole story, right? So throwing in a genealogy that explains Moses and Aaron and possibly is framed in such a way as to make them seem closer to the patriarchs might be the point there. All right. Chapter 7. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and Aaron, your brother, will be your prophet." This is similar to a line that God said to Moses earlier, where he said, "You'll be like God to Aaron," right? Mm-hmm. What this isn't saying that Moses is deified. Wasn't saying it then when he was talking about Moses and Aaron, right? This is just about the sort of information hierarchy. God will talk to Moses. Moses will talk to Aaron. Aaron will talk to Pharaoh, right? You must say whatever I command you. Then Aaron, your brother, must declare it to Pharaoh, so that he will let the Israelites go from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, multiply my signs and wonders. And multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And like we said, Pharaoh has this coming, because we already saw his initial default reaction was refusal and contempt. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh will not listen to you, but I will put my hand on Egypt and bring the divisions of my people, the Israelites, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. That word divisions there, that is a military idea. And this is going to feature later on, right?
What was division? Sorry.
Divisions is in verse 4. I'm actually going to find that.
That says, and bring out the ranks of my people.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, for some reason, the navigation buttons are gone from Blur right now. Anyway. That's mostly what I was going for. Ranks is a good way, I think, to express that. It is a military term, right? He's framing the people that are going to leave Israel in army terms, right? Yeah, we'll get into that later. 5. The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the Israelites from among them. So Moses and Aaron did this. They did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh tells you perform a miracle, tell Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh. It will become a serpent." We talked about this before. Because this is the sign that Moses was given back at the burning bush incident, that he was supposed to use to verify that he was who he said he was to the elders of the Israelites. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and did just as the Lord had commanded. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a serpent. We also talked about how the word serpent here, right? There's 2 words for serpent that are used in this book. There's Nachash, which was the word serpent from Genesis, the serpent that tempted Eve, and there's Tanin, which is otherwise rendered as dragon, right? And we talked about how there might be some literary irony going on there, because dragon is very commonly used as a symbolic idea for all of the forces of evil that are against God. And of course, Nachash, the original rebellious serpent, the devil, right? And how they get reduced to magic tricks that God does in order to prove who Moses and Aaron are. Okay. But then Pharaoh called the wise men and sorcerers, the magicians of Egypt, and they also did it the same way by their occult practices. This, I think, is an interesting verse because magicians and occult practices are in the same verse. And okay, in the 20th and 21st century, we tend to think when you say somebody's a magician, we think card tricks, pulling rabbits out of hats, stuff you see on America's Got Talent, right? We think stage magic, right? Magic in ancient times had a definite spiritual element to it, right? So we're not talking swish and flick Harry Potter card tricks, pull the rabbit out of the hat. We're talking people who are trying to perform supernatural things by being empowered by supernatural entities, right? They're trying to bargain with things that aren't God in order to gain abilities that
within Ouija boards.
Right. So when you see magicians there, the word for that in the passage, right, in Hebrew was kartumim, right, which was the word for the priests in Egyptian temple cults, right? So there's definitely a hardcore, wise men and sorcerers, right? They're not stage magicians, right? There's an absolutely explicit spiritual connection, or there's a spiritual context, a religious context to what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? Each one threw down his staff and it became a serpent, but Aaron's staff swallowed their staffs. Right? However, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. So was this God hardening Pharaoh's heart? God said he would harden Pharaoh's heart, but we're going to see other passages coming up where it's explicitly God. This is not phrased that way, right? So when you take the story as a whole, this looks to be, again, Pharaoh doing what Pharaoh wants to do. And later on, God will do something basically with the context of, you made your bed, now you're going to lie in it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning. When you see him walking out to the water, stand ready to meet him by the bank of the Nile. Take in your hand the staff that turned into a snake. Tell him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you. Let my people go so they may worship me in the wilderness, but so far you have not listened. This is what Yahweh says. Here is how you will know that I am Yahweh. Watch, I will strike the water in the Nile with the staff in my hand, and it will turn to blood. The fish in the Nile will die, the river will stink, and the Egyptians will be unable to drink water from it. So the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff, stretch out your hand over the waters of the Nile, over the rivers, canals, ponds, and all the water reservoirs, and they will become blood. There will be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in wooden and stone containers.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting where it talks about God told him to strike the water,
Mm-hmm.
and then later the rock and water thing.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely some narrative irony there, right? Speaking of narrative irony, this is the same river that they were told to throw the baby boys into,
mm-hmm.
right? Okay. More baggage. Remember what we said when we started this episode tonight about how Pharaoh was supposed to maintain this idea of order, ma'at,
mm-hmm.
right? Part of that was the annual flooding of the Nile. So the Nile would flood every year, and it would spread silt for miles and miles on either side of the Nile. And that's what they would grow their food in, right? So normally for Egyptians, the Nile is the thing that gives life to their country, right? So in contrast to the first sign, right, this one, well, the first sign was, the first sign might have looked like a showdown between Aaron and the Egyptian magicians, right? This one is definitely framed as a showdown between God and Pharaoh,
mm-hmm.
right? Because whose job is it in Egyptian culture to keep the Nile the way it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
It's Pharaoh's job, right? And there's nothing in here that says Aaron or Moses is turning it into blood. God's turning it into blood,
mm-hmm.
right? Aaron and Moses are just giving the go cue,
mm-hmm.
right? Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. In the sight of his Pharaoh and his officials, in the sight of Pharaoh and his officials, he raised his staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile was turned to blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad the Egyptians could not drink from it. There was blood throughout the land of Egypt. There's another thing to talk about here where it has been popular for some time for scholars and commentators to try to argue that the plagues in Egypt were just natural processes, right? So the popular theory is for them to say, oh, well, the Nile flooded particularly badly, and all of this red clay dirt was in there, and it caused the fish to die off in bacterial blooms, and it looked like blood and made the fish, die, so it stank, and that's what he was talking about, right? Well, then how did it affect the water that was in wooden and stone containers? We had that in verse 19, right? And how did it happen on cue, according to what God had told Moses and Aaron to do, right? Also, that whole natural process argument that is popular nowadays basically is going to fall apart in the next 2 chapters. Because the people that hold that theory will try to argue that these natural effects, one caused the next one in line, right? There's nothing in the text that indicates that.
Yeah.
So that's something you have to impose on the text to try to explain away what's obviously intended to indicate that God is powerful and Pharaoh is not.
Also, in year 14, I think you said Pharaoh was what?
14, then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to let the people go.
So in mine it says Pharaoh is unresponsive.
Yeah.
So he's like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, verse 22. But the magicians of Egypt did the same thing by their occult practices. So Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned around, went into his palace, and didn't even take this to heart. All the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink, because they could not drink the water from the river. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Hey, wait a minute, 7 days. We've seen 7 days pop up before. 7 days is very often used to call your mind back to the idea of the creation of the world, right? Insensitive. That's a good translation for heart of heart, right? So.
And it also did the same thing where it just says Pharaoh's heart hardened.
Yeah.
Not God hardened his heart.
Right. Exactly.
So he's still kind of like stubborn and not really affected.
Yes. So we will get other, we've said this before, right? We'll get other passages later where God explicitly hardens Pharaoh's heart. But this is cast as Pharaoh does this himself, right? Now, but notice what happens, right? The magicians can replicate water turning to blood, but they can't fix it, right? They can make it worse, but they can't make it go away. Pharaoh's job in their culture and in their religion is to prevent stuff like this from happening, right? Is to keep things the way they should be. He's responsible for maintaining cosmic order. Okay, in the Bible, who made cosmic order? God did. During creation, which took 7 days. Oh.
Technically 6 in a rest.
Technically 6 in a rest, right? But you still get that 7-day cycle that creation institutes. And very often, 7 can refer back to that idea, right? So this is like another layer of baggage to this whole narrative. On the one hand, you've got the power contest between Pharaoh, who is supposed to maintain cosmic order, and God. And God's going to prove that Pharaoh can't. On the other hand, you have God decreating cosmic order is one way you could look at it, right? Because, okay, well, when God created everything in Genesis, didn't he tell the water what to do and where to go? Didn't he make it for specific purposes and put it in specific places? Didn't it do what he said? Right? So it's almost like many of these plagues that we're going to read about in the coming chapters are cast in a way as to say, if God can create it, he can decreate it. If God can impose order, he can take that order away. That's how he can prove that he really is the one who's in charge here. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I think it's much better to look at it that way and to look at the power contest between God and Pharaoh, rather than to try to look at the plagues as natural processes that just so happen to be timed perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's explicitly cast that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The whole thing is cast as a contest between Pharaoh and God.
Yeah.
Right? Who's God that I should listen to? Well, he's this guy who's going to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't say anything in here about natural processes. That's not what the writer, it's not what Moses wants you to understand when you read it. He wants you to understand, he wants the Israelites to understand, this guy Pharaoh who used to be in charge, he's got nothing. Mm-hmm. Right? You all were afraid of him because he made you work hard, but this is what God does to people who don't recognize him. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and end there.
So it's sort of a, maybe not necessarily question to answer now, but I wonder if all the times that it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart was also the same times that Pharaoh said, please go talk to your God and tell him to stop.
We'll get into that. Jim's comment. Some also speak of the plagues as speaking against the gods of Egypt. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I might have this wrong, but I believe that the seasonal flooding of the Nile was actually personified as a god named Hapi in Egyptian religion. Right? So the Nile, which is supposed to flood, which is supposed to bring life to the Egyptians, instead is turned into this thing that brings them death. And Hapi in Egyptian religion was depicted as this kind of quasi-male-female thing, and had a lot of physical traits that are usually ascribed to fertility gods. So, good point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's actually going to get more apparent in the later plagues, I think. Hi, Mom. Yeah, if you have questions after you rewatch, let us know next week. We'll talk about those things. I'm sure I've said something incorrectly, because it's hard to talk for 50 minutes. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and sign off here. I'll see you all later. Enjoy Exodus. It's actually quite a lot of fun.
We gotta change everything now to say till 7.
Yeah. I had to find the button to end the stream first. Good night.